something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Today my guest is former CIA officer and CIA torture whistleblower John Kiriakou. We're going to be discussing a number of subjects, including Trump's strange Gaza removal plan, the JFK disclosure that Trump seems to be looking to achieve, and also 9/11, and in the context of Syria being now run by al Qaeda, and the final solution in Palestine being attempted by Netanyahu and apparently Trump. So please check the show notes for a link to John's Substack page and to his other ventures as well. Devil's Chess Club is part of the American Exception podcast. If you want to see this episode in its entirety, and if you appreciate this kind of research and analysis on the deep politics of the U.S. empire, consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. We currently have an ongoing series on Max Arvo's groundbreaking article on Jack Ruby, as well as our long-running Gray Alliance series, which looks at the Lansky Teamster Syndicate, CIA, Mossad threads running through the JFK assassination, Watergate, and beyond. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Either way, please kindly like this video and subscribe to this American Exception channel. John Kiriakou, great to be back with you.
Happy to speak with you. Thanks for the invitation.
So there is so much going on, and a lot of it falls into the category of bad, but also seeming to accelerate the end of U.S. hegemony, or seeming to accelerate the nuclear doomsday that might be coming, because it's so crazy and it seems the U.S. empire is in such a bad way at the moment. So the most explosive and recent thing is Trump's decision or announcement that it's time to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And as someone who spent time in the Central Intelligence Agency, and you specialized in the Middle East, and were an expert on this area, what's your take on Trump and this genocidal ethnic cleansing plan? I mean, ethnic cleansing is technically not considered genocide by parts of international law, but I actually think that the reason for that distinction is because of Israel and the West and the U.S. That they have. Now that I look at it, I'm like, oh God, that's why you have this weird ethnic cleansing genocide separation, and I bet it's because the U.S. and the West has always had this exact case in mind, and they wanted to be able to say that ethnic cleansing is somehow not genocide. But what do you make of Trump doing this and reversing U.S. policy, the two-state solution, even if it was a fake plan anyway? They haven't fully rebuked it like this before, so what's the significance of this?
Wow, there is so much to say about this, Aaron. First of all, you're exactly right. This is a proposed genocide. It is a war crime under international law to forcibly remove a people and seize their land. It's crystal clear in international law. You cannot do this. It's a violation. And I would note, too, not only has this already been roundly condemned by every government in the region, but the Saudis issued a statement of condemnation at 4:40 a.m. That's how strongly they felt about it. Even Jordan and Egypt, that really have to toe the U.S. line most of the time, came out and said this is a terrible idea and it's never going to work. And frankly, the only people who support or would support this kind of illegal genocide are the most extreme right wing of the Israeli government. It was amazing to me to see the video of Donald Trump making this absurd proposal while sitting next to Benjamin Netanyahu, as Netanyahu smiled and nodded his head. So listen, this is not going to happen. It's never going to happen. And if Trump did anything with this stupid announcement, it is that he doomed the Abraham Accords, which in my view were a terrible idea in the first place.
Right. And I mean, some people have made jokes that Trump is like an accelerationist, that he is attempting to ramp up the belligerence and illegitimacy of the U.S. empire so that it will implode and collapse faster. I mean, and they're usually joking when they say this, of course, but it does seem like this is the case. I mean, I'm trying to game out what happens if they attempt this. I don't think that they would, as much as Egypt and Jordan are total puppets of the U.S., I feel like they do have domestic realities that they must contend with, and that they would potentially be at risk for being ousted by their own population.
Absolutely. And both countries have seen uprisings in my lifetime. And look at it this way, too. Fully 50% of the population of Jordan is Palestinian. Right. These are refugees and the children and grandchildren of refugees, and they have to. The Jordanian government has to be sensitive to the wants of its Palestinian population. Another thing too. About a week ago, a member of the Trump administration floated the idea of taking all Palestinians and forcibly moving them to an island in Indonesia. That too is a war crime. You can't do that. But nobody really paid any attention a week ago. I talked about it a couple of times, but nobody paid any attention. Well, now the President of the United States is floating the idea. And it's just so absurd and so patently illegal and so comprehensively unpopular that it just will never happen. If anything, it weakens Donald Trump.
Right, but this is the strange position he's found himself in, and that we as observers find ourselves in, because he was, taking all that money from Adelson, which is, supreme sort of maximal genocidal Zionism, and they wanted, reportedly annexation of the West Bank. So he was pretty clearly a thrall of the Israel lobby. And if you read some of James Bamford's work and some of the analysis of it, it seems that Israel may have been behind the hack of Hillary's emails and things. At least they had advanced knowledge, and almost no one has paid any attention to that angle of the story. But that seems to be the one explanation that would actually explain what happened and why Trump would never get to the bottom of it, despite having the power of the Justice Department and the security agencies. Like, why would he have never been able to solve that mystery of how these things got hacked? But then if you think, well, was it Israel? And then you're like, oh, well, that would actually explain it. So you've got that aspect too, which is very strange. And the fact that Trump, when he takes office, he seems to scold Netanyahu, and he played that Jeffrey Sachs clip of Netanyahu being denounced very seriously and accurately by Jeff Sachs as being essentially a puppeteer of the U.S. and bringing it into these wars. And so he seemed to be realizing that the genocide in Gaza was going to be a bad look for him as he takes office. And so he wanted to be the peacemaker for a moment, it looked like, and compel or encourage Israel to have a ceasefire, although maybe their own military situation made them want to do that too. It's hard to say. But now he's going back the opposite direction. And is he just completely a thrall of the Israel lobby? Does he possibly think that this is in the national interest for the U.S. to do this? Or, what is it? What's motivating this decision by Trump, which, even as much as all other presidents have had to be, at least careful, if not subservient to the Israel lobby, they did not go this far. So why is Trump doing this? How does this conform to any conception of America first?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. And it's an important question. there are several theories. Today's Washington Post, for example, said that Jared Kushner is behind this. I think that's overestimating the intelligence and the capabilities of Jared Kushner. Perhaps this is from Sheldon Adelson's widow, who gave Donald Trump and the Trump campaign $150 million, in addition to the $100 million that Adelson had given the campaign 4 years ago. So I don't know. Yeah, I believe that deep down, Donald Trump is a Zionist, an ardent Zionist. His daughter is an Orthodox Jew. His son-in-law is an Orthodox Jew. You remember he took American Jews to task for not supporting the Republican Party and saying that they were traitors to Israel, as if they were Israeli citizens. Just bizarre statements. And I think that this combination of extreme Zionism and this notion that he's the greatest deal maker in the world has deluded him into thinking that everything he comes up with vis-a-vis the Middle East and the Middle East peace process is a great idea. It's this grand plan for peace when it's not. And you know, another thing, I just returned from Europe a couple of days ago, and I was reminded on this trip that the United States is the only Western country that no longer supports the two-state solution, right? And we don't support the two-state solution because the Israelis don't want us to. The two-state solution, or frankly, in my own personal view, a three-state solution, which would be Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, is the only way that there can ever be peace in the region. The Israelis have to allow the Palestinians self-determination. That's it. You know, Martin Luther King said, famously, never underestimate a man's desire to be free. And I can't think of anything that's more appropriate than this example right here. Donald Trump, though, is not the guy to bring peace to the Middle East. The Abraham Accords did not and could not bring peace to the Middle East. When Donald Trump said in the 2016 election that he could solve the Middle East problem in a day, he meant by screwing the Palestinians. And that's what the Abraham Accords were, right? You encourage the Saudis to open diplomatic relations. You encourage the Bahrainis, the Emiratis, the Tunisians, the Sudanese, the Moroccans to establish diplomatic relations with Israel, and you just screw the Palestinians. And that's just not going to work, no matter how many times he tries it.
As brutal as they were with the Gaza genocide under Biden, they killed maybe 10% of the population.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess there may not be a lot of food there now. It's hard to say. So they could essentially have a renewed kind of medieval siege combined with aerial blitzkrieg that they have been. Mm-hmm. But would the world stand for this? I mean, you have to wonder about Europe, if this could potentially contribute to a break with the U.S., because NATO seems to be dead at this point as a entity that has any purpose or utility for its members. I mean, how can this even? I don't see how this can work in the shorter or in the medium term. Even it's if they're not going to, they can't really relocate them. It doesn't seem that they can relocate them to Jordan and Egypt, as they said, or Indonesia, and it doesn't seem that they can just murder them all. Time does not seem to be on the Israelis and American side, and that seems to be, in my opinion, what was the reason for the response on October 7, to October 7, or maybe even the reason why Israel facilitated in some way the way that those attacks unfolded. I mean, the Hannibal Directive, but also, other steps they took to sort of ignore warnings for the whole thing. Like, they wanted to do this, I think, because of time. They realized time is not on their side because U.S. unipolar moment is fading. Mm-hmm. And so I think that seems to be logical. And when you look at how brutal the Zionists are, then you can't really put anything past them anymore. I mean, they're demonstrably guilty of genocide. They used to go, the ADL and everybody used to say, "Oh, that's a blood libel. That's a blood libel. How could you?" But like they've killed so many more children than anybody who accused them of blood libel ever or anybody who accused them of killing children in the past would have accused them of. I mean, no blood libel is as deadly towards children as what they've done in front of the whole world. So I feel like this issue, this crumbling of American unipolarity, the unipolar moment, and the imperative of a final solution for Palestine, this is coming together, and this is why we've seen what we've seen since October 7.
I agree, and I have two thoughts on this. I just returned from Ireland, and I think the Irish really get this issue better than most other Western European countries. They have repeatedly condemned Israeli actions in Gaza to the point where the Israeli ambassador has been withdrawn from Dublin and the Irish ambassador has been withdrawn from Tel Aviv. I think that's a good thing, because even in a small way, it puts pressure on the Israeli government, and it gives the rest of the Western European countries a model with which to address this problem, number one. Number two, I think that Donald Trump might be in over his head at this early stage of foreign policy. Think of it this way. In just the past, he's been president, 2 weeks now? He has threatened to annex Canada, to which a Canadian parliamentarian said, go ahead and annex us. That's 60 electoral votes that are going to go blue, and the Republicans will never win another race ever again. So go ahead. So number one, he's threatening to annex Canada. Number two, he's threatening to either annex or somehow take over Greenland, as if we need Greenland, where we already have military bases. And number three, Marco Rubio's first foreign trip as Secretary of State was to Panama to threaten to take over the Panama Canal. Now, it's one thing to threaten publicly, we should take the canal. We stole that canal fair and square. It's another thing to go and to repeat that privately. Now, this may be a negotiating tactic, but that's not how the rest of the world is seeing it. They're seeing it as a military threat. Well, if you're going to threaten Panama and threaten Canada and threaten Denmark, which owns Greenland, then what makes you think that's going to encourage those countries or others close to them to support your militarist position on Gaza? So I think that he's weakening himself while at the same time believing that his bellicosity is encouraging other countries to rally to the American side. It's just not happening.
No, it's not. And, there's a lot of debate about why the U.S. is so wedded to Zionism. And to my mind, it is very antithetical to the national interest. And so people that are saying that that Israel is just doing the U.S. bidding, they're the aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and they say that because people like Joe Biden have said that in the past, and even RFK Jr. made that argument at one point. But I just think about it as, okay, if your job is to flack for Israel, I mean, are you going to say that they're useless and that they don't, and that all we do is throw money at them for no real benefit to U.S.? No, you're not going to do that. You're going to come up with some sort of rationale for why Israel is somehow helpful. So I don't know why suddenly people on the left say, like, aha, look, this is it. They're helping us. Like, of course, people that are flacks and owned by the lobby are going to say that Israel does good things for us, like that it's in the national interest. But I mean, what I guess a lot of people's views have hopefully evolved on this, but why do you think, and I don't think it's either Israel controls the U.S. or the U.S. controls Israel, but the U.S. is an oligarchy, and Zionist oligarchs are very invested in Zionism in a way that's even perhaps more intense than the oil companies are interested, or oil oligarchs are necessarily focused on just oil profits. It's a different project that they have in mind. And there's no counter to it of people putting money into counter-Zionism institutions in the U.S. So, I mean, I guess, where do you come down on the reason for the U.S. disastrous, alliance with Zionism and maximal greater Israel Zionism.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, because you have a clearer historical understanding of this. But it's always been my understanding that this policy of blind support for Zionism and for Israeli Zionism in particular began during the Nixon administration. It was after Nixon's election in 1968, after the 1967 war, that Nixon decided that we would support Israel without any question. And that's been the policy ever since. If you look back to statements made by, for example, President Truman upon the founding of the State of Israel, through Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson even, there was more of a fair balance between Israel and the interests of the Palestinians. That went away with Nixon, number one. Number two, I went to Israel for the very first time in 2022. I went twice in 2022. And one of the things that struck me was as you're walking through the old city of Jerusalem, the walled city, it's divided into quarters. There's the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter, which didn't make any sense to me. But anyway, that's it. So you walk through the Jewish quarter, and it is absolutely spotless. The Muslim quarter is a shithole. And I think it's meant to be like that. But one of the things that was really notable was when you enter the Jewish quarter and you get closer and closer to the Western Wall, you start seeing signs where this magnificent center is brought to you by the Adelson family, and this magnificent museum is brought to you by the Schwartz family, and this one is brought to you by so-and-so family. So there are millions and millions and millions of dollars from American Jews that went to renovate the Jewish quarter. Another thing that was interesting to me was handbills that had been glued to the wall only in the Jewish quarter. And they said, "America, we are with you." What the heck is that supposed to mean? First of all, I don't want them to be with us. But what exactly was it supposed to mean? They're with us? On what? How about you guys fight your own battles and we'll fight our own battles? Thank you very much. But there's this propaganda that is all over the place that I think was probably meant to be more subtle than it actually is. And then when you go into these, outside the old city, you go into these extremist Jewish nationalist neighborhoods, you see this kind of thing everywhere. Banners with Netanyahu's face and Trump's face, or with Itamar Ben-Gvir's face and Trump's face, with an American hand shaking an Israeli hand. It's overwhelming, the level of propaganda that you see all over the city of Jerusalem. It was really off-putting to me.
Right. Yeah, I've seen those too, and that you can find. I've seen pictures of American flags flying in Israel and such.
It's weird.
And, yeah, it is. And this new aggressive posture. I mean, the Israelis themselves. There's a Caitlin Johnson column today where she says a poll by the Jewish People Policy Institute has found that more than 8 out of 10 Jewish Israelis support the plan proposed by Trump to ethnically cleanse Gaza Strip.
Sure.
And so
free land for more settlers.
Right, and if you've seen, Abby Martin's recorded these interviews of people in Jerusalem, and the median Israeli seems to be essentially have a lowercase n Nazi mentality. I mean, yes. I don't know the Lebensraum, the master race, like the Untermenschen. It's all there. Mm-hmm. Right in front of us.
You ask any Israeli 25-year-old, what do you think should be done with the Palestinians? And they'll tell you, we should kill them all. They'll tell you straight out to your face, we should kill them all. And that's the average Israeli that's out there saying that. And you know what? I think it's because they've been emboldened by U.S. policy. And I'm not just blaming Donald Trump here. The Democrats are just as guilty.
Yeah. And this would seem to be not acceptable for the. I mean, it's for the Democrats to be involved in this is weird because they've embraced kind of woke branding in a way that probably has hurt them because they kind of have overshot the median of the American public, on some of these things. But yet, I mean, the opposite of being woke or aware of injustice in the world to any extent is what is genocide of small children and seeing kids with their skulls exploded again and again, or snipers just sniping kids on purpose, which they've been doing. I mean, this contradiction for the Democrats, do they have any wherewithal at all, or do they have? I mean, I've heard them saying that like John Fetterman might be the future of the party.
God
I mean, I think
forbid.
that they've lost their minds. I think that they don't understand how much, especially the younger generation, just sees them as accomplices to kind of a Nazi-style evil.
I'll tell you, I sent John Fetterman's campaign $50 when he was running for the Senate, and I don't know, 6 months ago, I wrote the campaign a letter, and I said, I want my $50 back, you Zionist liar, phony. Of course, I didn't get any response, but God forbid if John Fetterman were to be the future of the Democratic Party. But let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's a very important issue that you raise here. Can you imagine being inside the Kamala Harris campaign and saying, well, on the one hand, there's a genocide happening in Gaza, but on the other hand, they are Jewish and we're supposed to be pro-Jewish, and I proudly describe myself as a Zionist, despite the fact that literally every single one of our European allies thinks that this is a mistake. So I'm going to go with the Israelis on this one. And then they can't fathom how they lost Michigan and Pennsylvania. They can't fathom it. Just yesterday, Hakeem Jeffries, and it shouldn't be lost on us that the man's first name is Hakeem, which is a Muslim name. Hakeem Jeffries reiterated the fact that he is a Zionist and that the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives supports Israeli Zionism. Why? What has Zionism done for the Democratic Party other than to push it off to the side and make it irrelevant? When are the Democrats, or when is anybody else in this country going to stand up for human rights and stand against genocide? Have we learned nothing from history? Apparently we haven't.
Yeah, I think it's in the Democrats' DNA, unfortunately, and it goes back to the Teamsters, the syndicate, the corruption of the Democratic Party. People don't understand what was going on in the post-war era and the pre-war years, really, that led to labor being intertwined with organized crime, and organized crime, in the personage of Meyer Lansky especially, being intertwined with Zionism, and with the Teamsters as a big part of that as well. The sort of Teamster Lansky thing with Italians selling drugs and then Lansky laundering
the money.
Yeah, it's like we have a history. We're more of a mafia state. I think the oligarchy of the U.S. is more of a mafia kind of a thing than we want to admit. And a lot of the money from that era, the drug money and the money that came from the casinos, which were also fueled by money laundering, this gets put into other legitimate enterprises, including military contracts like the TFX and General Dynamics, which was owned by Henry Crown, which was essentially Chicago outfit, which is syndicate, right? I mean, we are a mobbed up country. Harry Truman gave Lansky the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1945 in a secret ceremony. And I just read that there was this sheriff. There was a gangster named Paul Roland Jones, and I'm reciting this or recalling this from Peter Dale Scott's very dense but amazing book, Deep Politics and the Death of JFK. There was a sheriff who was going to take a bribe from a syndicate guy in Dallas in 1946, right before Rubio moves in, and he was saying that if he did this, he told the sheriff of Dallas that if he were to take this bribe and allow the syndicate to set up in Dallas, that he would have Harry Truman write an endorsement of his reelection. So, I mean, this is how so it's in the Democrats' sort of DNA, and I think that's part of what was happening with the Kennedys. If you want to say that they had some selfish motivations for going after the Teamsters and such, it was that they could clean out that part of the Democratic Party if they did that, right, and change it. But they didn't. They failed. And they basically, after they failed, they basically erased the Teamsters and Bobby Kennedy's enemy within thesis about the syndicate in the United States, and they just say, oh, it's this Italian thing, it's the mafia, and forget about all of that. So we've never really grappled with any of this. Like, I think that we don't understand how corrupt, at a fundamental level, American capitalism is. And once you take it global and you're pursuing global imperium, this oligarchy has more money than any collection of people in human history, more wealth and power, and yet the world has changed, and I feel like they're dinosaurs. So when Mark Rubio is saying, okay, America may not be a unipolar power anymore, but we can be a multi-power world of great powers, multipolar world of great powers. But this is just more, I think, him saying that we're going to be this is going to be our mafia fiefdom in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, that's one way to understand this.
Which would then explain Trump's statement about having no desire to protect Taiwan. You know, on the one hand, I think it's great that Trump at least claims that he doesn't want to be bogged down in wars around the world, rather. Great. Totally agree. I actually am supportive of a multipolar world. I think it's great. I think it gives us a better chance at a global peace than the United States being this hegemon. But then at the same time, it also ought to lead to a desire for good relations with China and Russia and any other up-and-coming world power, like BRICS, for example, BRICS as an organization. And we're just not seeing that. It's one thing to say, screw the Taiwanese, we don't really have any national interest there. We actually don't have very many national interests there. It's really not our problem. I don't really care one way or the other. But then at the same time, isn't it pro-American to want good relations with China because our economies are so closely intertwined, and good relations would allow us to cut defense spending? Why did the Chinese have bullet trains and we don't? Why did the Chinese have construction programs all around the world and we don't? Right? It's because we spend all of our money on weapons. And why aren't we trying to improve relations with Russia right now? I think we should be laser focused on improving relations with Russia if we're serious about this multipolar world that should be leading to peace.
Right, and if Trump, I mean, even his actions in the Middle East are contradictory, because he's announced that he wants to pull out of Syria. Yeah. I mean, maybe is he thinking that this is going to be okay? I mean, my optimistic, perhaps delusionally optimistic, but I don't really think this is likely. I'm just putting it out there as a possibility. But my hope is that perhaps Trump is thinking that, okay, we do need to retrench. We do need to basically have Monroe Doctrine as the renewed basis of U.S. foreign policy, because the global empire project has failed. But I personally have these commitments to Israel, so we're going to give them a go. We're going to be as, but I hope we're going to be as aggressive as we can in trying to deal with this, because we need to do it now, or we're not going to be able to do it because of where all the trends are going. So in some way, he and people like Rubio are responding to some salient facts about geopolitical reality, and that maybe this will fail, and that he will say, well, I did my best. We can't go to war with Iran. Everyone the unanimous consensus is that it would be a disaster, and it would hasten the end of U.S. global dominance, and this would guarantee Israel's defeat. I mean, because what they really need to do, which hopefully would result in the end of a Zionist entity over there, would be what Jeffrey Sachs says, which is to use the UN to just create a Palestinian state and make it a full member state on pre-67 borders. You could do that, and that wouldn't make everything perfect right away,
No.
but it would allow them to have diplomatic relations with other countries.
Exactly.
It would allow them to have trade, Gaza to have trade with the rest of the world. They wouldn't have this blockade. And I think it could potentially lead to a civil war in Israel because of what you would have to do with the settlers in the West Bank. Like, they would know that they were on limited time and needed to have an exit plan, and then what would they do? Would that lead to a civil war in Israel and the end of Israel as a Zionist ethno-state? And maybe some Jewish people who aren't psychotic and who can stomach the thought of living with the Palestinians of Palestine, maybe they would stay, and there could be a pluralistic society and a one state or something like that. But is Trump going to back? Trump has these aspects of his policy that seem to suggest that he is aware of the situation of the U.S., that the unipolar moment is fading. Maybe this is just bluster to try and give Israel the best chance, and that he will step away from the abyss. But do you think he will go to war with Iran and get involved more deeply in Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen, potentially? There's a resistance in Iraq. I mean, what do you think they will do if it comes down to it, if they face resistance here? How far will Trump go for Israel? This is the question. In the second half of this episode, John and I discuss Trump's order to declassify JFK assassination documents, as well as the continued relevance of 9/11 in the context of the Zionists' final solution for Palestine and the Western-backed al Qaeda takeover of Syria. If you would like to hear the rest of this episode, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Either way, please kindly like this video and subscribe to this American Exception channel. Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. The U.S. is a dying empire run by evil people. This is why everything in the U.S. is so insane. If we are objective, it's better that the U.S. be a dying empire run by evil people than a thriving empire run by evil people. At least the former holds out the hope that, with the eventual death of the empire, the evil people might not be the most powerful actors in the world. Alternatively, in order to hold on to their empire, they could destroy the human species with nuclear weapons or biological warfare. It's too bad that there's no U.S. left to organize a U.S. majority against an oligarchic regime that does not serve the interests of the majority. A lot of social, cultural, political manipulation has been deployed to allow such a tiny minority to rule over a nominal democracy. Capitalism really is top-down rule by an oligarchy of wealth. The condition of the West today settles the argument. The U.S. hides most of its lawless despotism with state secrecy and clandestine statecraft. We can call this a parafascist system. It is different from Italian or Nazi-style variants, but the function is the same: absolutist violence to protect the oligarchic imperial regime. On the surface, MAGA seems to mark the emergence of a more overt fascism. I am someone who since 2009 has intensely studied the lawless U.S. empire. As such, it bothers me to hear so-called mainstream people freaking out about MAGA when so many unbelievably sinister things are done by the U.S. empire day in, day out, decade after decade since World War II ended. I hope that we will see Trump simply fail in each of the main arenas where he's trying to save the dying empire on behalf of its evil owners. Trump may admire Andrew Jackson, but the world does not approve of Palestinian removal. The U.S. has no basis to dictate any terms to Russia over Ukraine, a country that the U.S. has wrecked beyond measure. A war with Russia would be the end of the world. The U.S. cannot attack Iran without the far most likely outcome being a catastrophe for the U.S. and the world. Fighting a war with China over Taiwan, which the U.S. and China both agree is part of China, would be a disaster for the world, Taiwan most of all. With Trump's rearguard actions failing, and the U.S. increasingly exposed around the world as the dying empire run by evil people that it is, will the U.S. find it easier or more difficult to dominate its nearest and dearest historical victims, the peoples of Latin America? And can the U.S. oligarchy still maintain control over U.S. society when the U.S. economy has the imperial rug pulled out from underneath it? Will the U.S. oligarchs and the U.S. public tolerate the U.S. being such a dysfunctional and failing society when other parts of the world are seeing societies improve, often dramatically in historic terms? They hope that perhaps AI can save them, that somehow it will be the silver bullet to allow them to establish some utopian system of cyber feudalism. Utopian for them, dystopian for the 99%. The oligarchs of corporate wealth will be the cyber feudal lords, naturally. I think that they will fail. The greed and lawlessness of the U.S. oligarchy represents the worst of humanity. They literally aspire, or aspired at least until recently, to lawlessly rule the whole world indefinitely in order to acquire as much wealth and power as possible. These are the organizing principles of the U.S. empire, or the White West, whatever we want to call it. The egotism of the West is a cancer for humanity. Emmanuel Todd is correct, and I earlier argued the same basic thing in American Exception, Empire, and the Deep State. The best hope for international peace and progress is the end of U.S. imperial power. In other words, if the U.S. is ever to see peace and justice prevail in any meaningful sense, the U.S. empire must first lose on the devil's chessboard.